In this episode, I am once again joined by Lopon Yudron Wangmo, American teacher of Tibetan Buddhism and author of several books, including her most recent, Clearing the Way to Awakening. Lopon Yudron Wangmo shares stories of her discipleships under various spiritual gurus, such as Lama Tharchin, recalls memories of the California Vajrayāna scene, and remarks on the qualities she has observed in realized masters. Lopon Yudron Wangmo reflects on her ADHD struggles with concentration in meditation, offers a critique of śamatha practice, and shares her own relationship to the dialectic between effort and rest. Lopon Yudron Wangmo explains how Dzogchen works, shares her experiences in extended solo retreat, and warns about the possibility of psychological regression during Tibetan Buddhist 3-year retreats. So without further ado, Lopon Yudron Wangmo. Yudron Wangmo, welcome back to the podcast.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here, Steve.
Well, I'm delighted to see you again. And I'd like to congratulate you on the publication of the audiobook version and workbook of Clearing the Way to Awakening, your book on Ngondro, which we talked about, in fact, in our first interview. We went into that. So congratulations. I wonder if you might say something about the process of putting that together and what's happening with the audiobook and the workbook and so on.
Yeah. Audiobooks are really interesting with Dharma. A lot of the zone isn't as flooded, in the audiobook realm for Dharma publications. The major publishers, Wisdom and Shambhala, they are going to, obviously, but they haven't 100% embraced it yet. And there's a lot of obstacles to making audiobooks for their kind of formal books, from books and translations, so forth. It presents pronunciation challenges to a hired professional audiobook actor. It presents also like issues about the sort of staid way of presenting things in the classical Buddhist text, which is a beautiful tradition. But if you're reading it aloud, it's like, okay, now section 1, subtopic A. It's like reading an index or something for part of it until you get to the main substance. Still, I've just been reflecting a lot on our times, and if we can make our writing less conservative and kind of more conversational, at least have some writers do that in the Tibetan Buddhist space, which is a little edgy to do it because there were rules in Tibet about who wrote books and how they were structured and everything you did. It was all formulaic. Then, it's really, it stands a better chance of reaching people. Also, the people sitting down to read books, it happens, but mostly romance novels and fantasy and so forth. Entertainment books these days, less. As the market for Buddhist books has gone down by 2/3, and particularly the staid ones, So I'm just thinking the next step beyond writing a conversationally written book, and it's where the terms are defined and, it's just easier for people, is to just do it out loud. And then, that's again breaking another taboo, because you're supposed to be, when someone is Dharma teacher is teaching, you're supposed to be listening like Manjushri or Mother Tara, and they even describe you have giant ears, you're nothing but ears to listen very carefully. And that is so beautiful and wonderful. But, here we are. People are in their cars. People are driving trucks and taking care of caregivers for loved ones, etc., working around the house. And why not, since we have a completely different technology, provide an atmosphere of immersion where people are, while they're doing mindless activities that might be a little bit boring, instead they're filling their minds with the nectar of Dharma. So that's my thought about it. I ended up doing it myself because cost is one factor, but also, and I ended up doing it over and over again myself, re-editing and editing and audio. I spent months doing this audiobook because I found like the standard way of narrating that you learn in an audiobook creation process is a very fast pace. and especially by old people's standards, we're all have a different tempo, so it's geared towards younger people in the snappiness of it, but also there's no pausing for reflection at all, not even. So there's 5 seconds. I mean, you've edited things, 5 seconds, 0.5 seconds, half a second is standard between sentences, maybe a little more between paragraphs and a little more between sections. But that also, AI, now there's AI narration, and they're following that. It's going to be the way things go, because it's getting increasingly expensive to have a voice actor. Unfortunately for the voice actors, I mean, it's so marvelous, some of these people. But anyway, I went back and re-edited the whole thing because it just didn't fit with the genre, and so I want to be supposed to listen and then at least pause for a moment, like even to do like 0.7 seconds or something between. Anyway, I'm just saying there's unique qualities to audiobooks, and we're in a way in our infancy on discovering those. They aren't quite guided meditations like you get on the Insight Timer and so forth. But they are, I think they need to slow down a little bit in parts and let people absorb what's going on, because it may be the first time they've ever heard it. So anyway, it was a great adventure. I'm glad it's done. Don't want to do another one. And I hope that people find it really valuable.
As you're talking there, it strikes me that you're, in a way, reversing the direction of text composition. Because how many books in the last sort of 50, 60 years, and even actually stretching back into books by classic authors, Gampopa, whoever the case may be, were dictations or notes based on oral instruction, actually. And so we think of it as a written document, which of course it is, but it may have started life as a sort of an oral teaching. There are many of the Lamas books these days, aren't there, that are done like that. And so somebody edits them, puts them together. I've interviewed people who've collaborated with Lamas to do that. And there are certain difficulties and challenges they face. And now you're going in the other direction. You're taking a written document and you're making it oral.
Yes. Well, it did happen. As I understand it, and you probably heard too, that families, perhaps they're illiterate, or perhaps they want the blessing of someone else reading it, would hire people to come over and read the Kunzang Lama Shelong, the Words of My Perfect Teacher, or some other holy text. And I realized I need to ask somebody from old Tibet if they're, did that mean that they were listening with rapt attention, or was it more like an act of merit, like reading the Prajnaparamita as a blessing, hiring somebody to do that? Did they just sit in your living room and read it really fast, and you didn't really listen to it, or weren't expected to understand it? Probably a mix of those things. So there is a tradition of reading aloud, but a recording of somebody reading aloud and overtly multitasking while somebody's reading aloud, that might be new. But I'm interested in how texts were composed. I found myself wondering, was Patrón Paché sitting down? Probably. He was a loner, kind of, whenever he could be writing down out the whole book, and that's why all these outlines came and so forth. Or could have been his students who assembled it, like you've mentioned that people are helping you archive your podcasts. Volunteers came forth to do that and organizing them, and so forth. So I don't know. I'd like to learn more about that. But anyway, I'm rambling. I just want to say that it's an exciting experiment to me. I'm really excited to see how people right now, in this point in time. I'm waiting in the next few days for it to be released. And you never know, especially as somebody, an indie publisher or self-published person, how much interest will be generated. But I hope I'm doing it non-exclusive with the Audible people. And in the future, I'm going to roll it out in different places, this slaved over recording of the book. And so people may see it pop up even on YouTube or something in the future.
And what about this workbook?
Well, I'm composing that right now, and I'm assuming it'll be released. And this is something, I wouldn't have the slightest interest in a workbook for Ngondro right now. But when I was 20, if I had access to that when I was 20 or 30, then that was the era in which that would be really exciting. So in other words, each chapter Ngondro inherently poses questions to oneself, the things you need to reflect upon in any of the practices. And particularly, we have doubts, we have fears, we have stuff that comes up for us in practice that weren't often addressed by the standard text. So and here's another way where I'm flipping things on its head. Students, I don't think were encouraged to, journal about, what when they considered impermanence, what comes to mind, et cetera, to make, to fill in. I'm going to have maybe a color me Guru Rinpoche and things like that. Very simple, and really to help people not listen passively or read passively, but bring it into their hearts, especially the few people who are really engaged with Ngondro these days. It's a few in relation to society as a whole, like to tune into the process, maybe, and they really do Ngondro in the morning, they could be writing in the book and contemplating it with the help of the workbook in the evening. Who knows? It'll be interesting to see how people relate to it. I'm just trying to fill out a little supportive nest for people who are interested in Ngondro, whether they're going to do it for a month or going to do the whole traditional accumulation.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, congratulations and all that. And I think by the time this comes out, all of that will be out. So the links, of course, will be in the show notes so people can check it out. So today we had decided to talk about your, in a way, spiritual journey. Specifically, that is, the relationships with various lamas, teaching relationships, teacher-student relationships with various lamas, teachings received and retreats undergone. And you've had a very interesting trajectory in that respect. In the previous episodes, the first one we talked about Ngondro and about the book, but also around that subject. In the second episode, we talked about your life story and the various from your childhood with a psychic spiritualist mother through to radical feminism and then into your dharmic path. But we decided in that second episode, why don't we take a sequel to give that dharmic path the time it deserves? So I wonder if you might take us through that, your trajectory in terms of lamas met, teachings received, retreats undergone, etc.
Oh, sure. I will say that some things being available from female teachers was that supported moving into relationship with Tibetan Lamas was very important. By that point, I think Woman of Wisdom had come out from Lama Tsultrim Alioni, and also I read Anne Klein's Meeting the Great Bliss Queen, but I didn't intersect with her very much. I did meet Lama Tsultrim at some point, and then Lama Yeshe Daichin Yeshe Wangmo in Hawaii was really the only person who was authorized to teach and fully made a lineage holder officially by Lama Tharchin Rinpoche. So having contact with them made me feel safe and like these were good people I was getting involved with. And I ended up, so I came out of the basic training in the Shambhala system and out here in California, moved out here to California, where it was very alive with these wonderful lamas. First, Lama people haven't heard of, Lama Gampo Tsetan came. I didn't meet him. Lama Tartang Tuku, but those are early 70s and stuff. And then Gyaltsen Rinpoche, Chada Tuku, and others set up little centers on the West Coast. And that, and then Pema Usling was established the Vajrayāna Foundation in the Santa Cruz Mountains by Lama Tharchin Rinpoche and others in relation to Dongse Tinli Norbu Rinpoche, the lamas around him. created that a really one, and the Westerners who were, made it happen. And so when I really liked the idea of Vajrayāna. I was even though I was practicing śamatha and vipassana, and I went around and met the lamas on the West Coast in every lineage, and went to all the centers at the time. And Lama Tharchin Rinpoche was very, very magnetic, very kind. And I liked it. He was an artist. I liked that he was married and with children, and had a life, a little bit. Most of his life, though, really promulgating Dharma. So he was very, very active at the time. And you could, at that time, the fax machines was how you communicated what was happening now. This is the 90s, right? So you get a fax at work, and where's Lama Tharchin going to be this week? So I managed to, I went and saw him speak a couple of times, and then I decided he was really where it was at. And honestly, my meditation instructors and so forth also all felt that way at the time. So he was very highly regarded and very active. And I went and saw him in the Bay Area, talking around all the different places, saw how he acted and so forth, went to Pimosling, met his students. It was very undeveloped at that point, and saw, as I discussed in my book a lot, I may have mentioned to you, signs that he was a different kind of entity than I was. Same at the heart, but I often talk about one key event when we were in a room with all wall of windows behind him, and it's an old building, and the windows, one window just slid down freely in its slot, and right behind his head made this really loud bang, sudden bang that nobody was expecting. And I don't even think he noticed. I mean, it wasn't that he was in any way distracted. He was totally there with what he was saying. He just went right on talking, and everybody else in the room jumped. And later I saw in the same room, Lama Wangmo was teaching, and she said the same thing happened. Bang. They didn't yet have the problem solved. Bang behind her back, and she said, "Oh, off to Dewa Chen." So that's two enlightened ways of dealing with. So that's stuff. All I'm saying is you can't force that to happen. You have no way of knowing it's happened when stuff spontaneously happens in the environment. And I found this a good measure of a great Lama. Also, I was very close to Lama Pema Dorje Rinpoche, which we can talk about later. And he, I was out in the community with him and driving in places, and I saw all kinds of things happen, and unexpected things and unwanted circumstances, and seeing how someone walks the walk when it's uncontrived, and they're not trying to behind the scenes, and they're not trying to show off to anyone. It's just who they are as a yogi. So Lama Tharchin spent 8 or 9 years in retreat in Tibet, and as a young man, and very young man. And then they were forced to leave Lamaling in southern Tibet, Lama Dudjom Rinpoche's center. And they stayed as long as they could until the Chinese communists put a lock on the shrine room door. And then it was like they knew that was a signal. So they had made a plan and escaped over the mountains. And anyway, somebody would be better qualified to talk about that with you. And I could name some people. But they came out into exile in Orissa, India, mainly, and some in Nepal. Dudjom Rinpoche's communities got established mainly those places. And where am I going with this? Lama Tharchin continued to be sort of like since he'd learned all the ritual and so forth under Dudjom Rinpoche directly in his retreats, he became the ritual guy. People, Dudjom Rinpoche and others would send people to him to teach them how to do a closed retreat, all the procedures and how to make the shrine and so forth. And so he wasn't a famous Rinpoche. He would have been famous sort of if he stuck with his family lineage and moved to Amdo, where his family came from, and they held a yogi lineage. But he had no interest in fame. So he wanted to actually wander after his retreats. He wanted to wander like a nobody because he didn't want to be treated special and ruined, with pride. So the worst thing, the Dudjom Tersar, Dudjom Rinpoche, Jugdesha Dorje was so, I never met him. Some of your listeners may have, was so humble. He didn't act in any special kind of way, and yet because of his qualities, people naturally knew that, they were blown away by him. But he was wearing the lay people's chupa and so forth. So, and so Lama Tharchin came to the West and first in Spokane, and then moved down and established Pimosling in Central to Northern California. And a huge amount of activity grew up around him. And so at that point, Dudjom Rinpoche had formally asked him to teach. And Dungsi Tuli Norva Rinpoche asked him to stay in the United States and teach, which was frightening for him because people didn't seem to have any faith. He'd wanted to go to like backwoods in Nepal where he could find people that had faith and devotion and the Dharma. But starting from ground zero with people, he couldn't understand why we were asking so many questions. It wasn't, it was impertinent. It was like questioning the Lama, but it wasn't done hostily like that. People just had a lot of questions. But he said that he found out that after people got their questions answered, they would settle down and practice. And then actually there were positives to it. I don't want to mischaracterize what he said, but the way I understood it is that he found that actually, asking questions and getting them answered is a good thing. So anyway, he started a 3-year retreat facility and started people going. What year was that? I'd have to ask somebody else. But it was like in the early 90s. And many people cycled through that facility over the years, dozens and dozens. And some have done 2-3 retreats, some have done more, but more, 8 years living in that facility, that kind of thing. I'm not one of them. What I did, I was a working person. I was working as a nurse and a nurse practitioner and alternative medicine provider sometimes. And when I became Lama Tharchin's disciple, I felt that my best chance, there was another model besides 3-year retreat of going into retreat and doing a 3 to 6 month cloistered retreat and then repeating as you can. And this was in agrarian parts of Tibet, such as Amdo. This was a thing where people meditated in the winter, and the winters were long and cold. And I hope I'm not repeating myself, but then in the summertime, they were doing agricultural work. So I was an RN. I wasn't like a hospital RN, so things weren't totally free and easy. I could drop in and out, but with, in nursing, there's not a sense of like you betrayed your resume if you're not plugging along and always working and so forth. It's normal. And it's easy to find work. So that was one model. A lot of my peers did things like that, massage therapy and so forth, and where they could get away and it wasn't so rigidly framed. So I did that. And I then also became a student of his a good friend, Lama Dorje Rinpoche, who was able to teach some advanced practices in private. And I did practice a whole lot in my day-to-day life, and working life, and getting up early. And I got trained. Now I'm habituated to getting up super early, practicing. That was a transition, though. And so Lama Dorje very often would supervise my cloistered solo retreats, where I don't think it's good to do a cloistered solo retreat for months when you're just starting out. And I had the common sense to know that. So I would, first do it on vacations, like 1 week. Then I went to 3 weeks somehow. And then I went to a 3-month retreat and so on. 6-month retreat. And yeah, so that kind of, and this was the standard Dzogchen Tirsar path for the most part. I also had connections with Lama inside of Tibet, still there, and I can't, better not to talk about him too much because things are really harsh inside China right now. But I did some Longchen Nyingthig practice as well in retreat. I don't know if your listeners know what any of these things are, so I'll just say that there's a whole world of practices that were revelations of a 19th century figure, Dzogchen Lingpa, and a 20th century figure, Dzogchen Rinpoche Jyeshe Dorje, and promulgated then again by his subsequent incarnation, who is now passed on, Dzogchen Sangye Pema Yeshe. Yeah. So there's a path, and there's many ways in and out. And I was fairly, maybe a little more independent than I could have been. I was kind of deciding what I wanted to do next. I wanted to do all of it and everything, and in the proper order, and as much as I could. And that was really, and I was really, really lucky that I had the support to do it. So I did, and it wasn't until later, 2008 or something, when I was accepted into a 3-year retreat. I wasn't in a relationship at that point, so it was okay. And I was able to, because of my mother passed away and left me with some money. I was not free of money anxiety, but almost everybody in a 3-year retreat has money anxiety about how to make that happen. So anyway, so I completed 3-year retreat under Lama Tharchin in this cloistered facility, and in the Dzogchen Tirsar way, and learned a lot. In that setting, you learn how to work with people, solo retreat in some ways is easier than group retreats because nobody's going to get in your face, right? So interpersonal challenges and what things that happen to the whole facility, you're part of a group. That's all part of the 3-year retreat process. And so it's different. I really feel it's a positive thing. I don't know how many people nowadays can do such a thing, but it was emphasized. It was like also a time to spend where you had access on Tharchin Rinpoche, who liked being inside the facility most of the time. If the good group was in there, and personally got to be there when eat lunch with him and see how he acted off the throne. So what would you like to know?
You mentioned these little evidences of attainment. For example, the perennially falling window that sort of, I suppose, is sort of testing all the lamas that come there, serving as a test anyway. And you said that Lama Tharchin didn't react to it at all. In fact, he just seemed to keep going. And Yeshe Wangmo made a joke after they were chanting. After they were chanting. So what is that testing exactly? So, of course, if a window falls behind me, I'm going to flinch, probably, right? My body will tense, my shoulders will raise up. I might have I'll immediately look I won't be able to help it probably. I'll immediately be drawn to the sound. My attention will go there. But that's not happening there. So what if I wonder if you might contrast, if you want, my reaction as I've described it to this reaction, and what makes that reaction, what is it revealing?
That's the question, I think. So the process of, the way Dudjom Tirsar is framed is generally a gradual path from emphasizing Ngondro, 3 inner tantras, and Dzogchen as the tippy top that you work your way towards. Somebody's is out there saying, no, that's not the way my Lama did it. That's not the way any Dudjom Tirsar Lama does it, in the sense that they introduce the view from the very beginning. Even in Dudjom Rinpoche and Lama Tharchin Rinpoche, I know, public talks, they'd be sharing the view of this great perfection. So what the view always makes it sound philosophical or something. I never, the word didn't compute for me the first 150 times I heard it, because it seemed like a cognitive process. And but what's really referring to is, somehow you've been introduced to the nature of your mind, and it may have, most likely it was from some great Lama Rinpoche intentionally doing it with you. Could be unintentionally, you're just listening or being with a great Rinpoche is sort of contagious. That old saying is like a ordinary tree in a eucalyptus forest comes to smell. They take on the qualities of, I'm saying eucalyptus, I meant sandalwood. Here it would be eucalyptus, right? In California, we got eucalyptus. So anyway, the sandalwood forest, and it becomes imbued with the scent of sandalwood and gains some of the qualities of that. So being around, I really recommend being physically around, if you can possibly swing it, really excellent lamas. And so you're learning in eating lunch with Lama Tharchin Rinpoche, or dealing with day-to-day with Lama Pima Dorje Rinpoche, I was learning how to be in the zone, and zone doesn't mean zoned out or spaced out. How to be present in your body in a way that everything. Well, first of all, the nature of your mind doesn't change throughout the 4 bardos. The bardo of this life, the transitional state we're in now. You so internalize. This is one thing I think is one of the most important things about Ngondro, is you so internalize the whole vision of yourself on a journey through the 4 or 6 bardos, a cyclical journey. That's not that your basis, the empty aspect of your mind is always present. So it's like Lama Tharchin used to say, the way he put it is like, Yeshe never goes, you're in the emergency room. Yeshe Sogyal is never in the emergency room, Yeshe Sogyal is there with you, but there's no emergency. There's never any emergency if you're tuned into this aspect of your mind that is present, clear wakefulness. It's got a juicy quality, and although your body may suffer and windows may crash down behind you, it's not the point of your life. So it becomes kind of irrelevant. I hope I'm saying that right, because that's really a profound question. And so you're in the Rinpoche. Lama Tharchin Rinpoche always was this big sense of space came with him. Very present, very focused on whatever you put in front of him. His attention was like razor sharp on it, like especially if it's an art project. But he was also wasn't like his mind wasn't going out, as Longchen puts it. the phone rings. He didn't talk about phones ringing, and your mind goes out and emerges with that object. It's like almost like a physical thing. So Lama Tharchin's mind, nature of mind, was staying put, and the object that was placed in front of him sort of came to him, entered his space, and then naturally something happens where he is connected with that thing. But he hasn't left, he hasn't become mindless. His mindfulness of dharmata, the true nature of phenomena, is always present. So I don't know if a window crashed behind my head, whether I would jump or not. Probably not. Probably not, but somebody can test me at some point. And likewise, seeing, the whole he embodied, Lama Tharchin embodied Dharma, because he was raised also with dance and yogas and so forth. And so the great thing about Vajrayāna is it explicitly addressed body, speech, and mind all the time. So his movements were dance-like, he was graceful. It was just a whole different way of sitting in the world.
You're talking here about the view, about Dzogchen, about these very high kind of profound vehicles, I guess we could say, and states of mind and so on. I recall from some of my, Vipassana and śamatha kind of meditation days, right?
Yeah.
Little bits I've done here and there, that sometimes this issue would come up as well, of reactivity. So I'm wondering about the contrast, in other words, between what I'm going to say and what you've been saying. And it used to be said that with enough concentration, distractions can come and go, but they don't trip the switch of distraction. They seem to sort of pass through like a weather storm passing through, but they don't break the concentration. That doesn't seem to be quite what you're talking about either. The other thing that I've heard happen is there's such a settledness of the body and such a relaxedness of the mind that the sound just comes into existence and you're sort of aware of it as it enters, as it arises, and then you're aware of it as it passes. And it doesn't create a second order reaction in the body and mind necessarily. It's, in other words, experienced completely without any reactivity. And these were often in the situations, the context I'm thinking of, context I've heard about and so on, are associated with states of high concentration or profound settledness, maybe a bit of both. But once again, that's a sort of state. But what you're talking about here, or was it the case then that Lama Tharchin, these lamas that you're referring to, they're constantly in a state of high concentration like that, like a high state of Shinei? That's not quite the same thing as Dzogchen, though, is it?
No. Well, it's hard because how they talk about Shinei or śamatha is, from a Dzogchen perspective, is different than it may be that people are really practicing śamatha and vipassana in the Theravada sense, So I'm not saying they have an accurate, reflection of what was going on, because they were worlds apart, Yeah, well, he definitely had śamatha, and I'm not someone who has great concentration. This has been a relief for me. I've had ADHD and all these things. The eye has all those things. But it's been relief to me that I don't have to engage with the eye and all its concerns about meditation and post-meditation. Is my mind doing that? I mean, can be a contrived state, and also there can be a sedating quality to shamatha practice as I know it. And there's a critique of shamatha practice from the Dzogchen perspective, as I'm sure you know, that it can just lead to a kind of zombie-like existence. I don't know if that's really happening or not, but there was this feeling that maybe they found, those monks who they find sort of still sitting in meditation hundreds of years later in the caves in China. You hear about those. That's a bad news from the Dzogchen perspective. It's not like a sign of accomplishment, it's a sign of problem. And, so that they never, not, they're kind of away, they're still alive, kind of zombie-ish, just sitting like a flower pot. And gosh, this is sort of beyond my pay grade, but just based on observation of, so they use actually in the beginning of the, if you're going through an orderly presentation, such as the Contratuktik Ishisogyal cycle and the Dujum Tersar, or others, they do a little bit of śamatha with you, using, for example, a seed syllable, or meditating on a deity. They didn't really use the breath that much in these tantric systems, but that kind of, or simply sitting in a state of śamatha. And they use that as a way to teach you how not to do it. So, of course, there's always some element of śamatha in any time that you're sitting and focusing. I mean, it's just uncontrived śamatha, but they used to, so you can just not just be resting in shinē, but have a brighter, uncontrived sense of presence that permeates everything you do, whether you're doing formal practice on the cushion or walking around and so forth. And what I've been reflecting on recently is I did a lot of effortful practice, and I was really enthusiastic about it. And this is there's kind of phases to life. It was described to me that Lama Pema told me of great Lama Sherab, who was close to Dudjom Rinpoche, that he said that in the yogi communities, they considered like the first third of your life is effortful, making accumulations. The second is like doing the yogas. So they would have like through age 30, you're exerting yourself in these accumulations, and at 30 to 60, you're doing yogas, and then 60 to the rest of your life, you're doing Dzogchen. So my job now is to cut out all the goal-driven, exertional, work mindset. And once you're trained, the risk in this tantric approach to Dzogchen, there's many benefits, but the risk, I'll be honest, is that you're someone like me and I'm used to striving. It's hard, once if you recite a few mantras, it's hard not to start counting them and setting goals. And a feeling that then creates a sense that realization and Buddhahood is somewhere in the future. And that is the enemy of sitting, of Dzogchen. You really can't do Dzogchen thinking that you're practicing for the future. You have to be sitting in your Buddha right now. And so we have to be mindful when there's a lot of people now are in their 60s, 70s, 80s who were very well trained. And I'm not saying what people have to do. Really, people also have personal affinities to different kinds of practices. But it would be great if we could start following Longchenpa's advice about how to be planless, goalless, and really abide. That's the third, being, the three statements, four statements, Arab Georgia, 6 on the deck, 3 statements, is, being introduced to nature of your mind, recognizing it, and then staying in it, and sometimes we're so well trained to be striving that it's just staying in it is gets set to the side. And so we all have life tasks, and everything's squished now because very few people in their 20s, very few people in their teens and 20s are doing in-depth Vajrayāna practice. So everything is really packed into age 30 and on, or age 40 and on. And then you're working with your Lama to work with circumstances. and get on with it. Mm-hmm. And it's been really rewarding, Steve. I really, to feel, I would have felt really unsatisfied when I came to die if I hadn't done this with my life. And I wanted to know the whole path. And I'm so grateful that our Lama Tharchin and other lamas here on the West Coast didn't feel like dumbing things down for us, didn't feel like really making things easier for us. They really wanted, it was a time and a place where also people could work part-time or work a job for a while and then take some time off. Construction people also. It was in ways, there was largely a working class, crew of yogis. And they would, do construction work for a while and then quit, do a retreat, then pick it up again. And so that's a California lifestyle of the 90s, and early 2000s, but it's really tough now because of housing costs. Yeah. I don't know if I answered. We started on what's the difference between Shine, really, and resting in this wide open. It's not meditation. It's uncontrived. It's not, you're not sitting down and saying, I want my mind to, calm down, or not explicitly focus on an object, or even an object of saying, okay, I'm really focusing on emptiness, or the absence of self. And then there's a word like Zongtal, which could be like transparency, translucency, or like that, where that's what I feel with the sound of the crashing window. It passes through unobstructed. There isn't any I there that is strong sense of I there that's taking things personally. That's one thing you notice as you get to be an experienced practitioner, right? You see this in the wonderful people you have on your podcast, is nothing's a big deal anymore because you don't have this huge defense of your I self going on that is taking offense, or they're trying to make yourself great or famous, or trying to all this trying and trying to make a story out of, as Pema Chodron would say, out of your life. That's all pretty boring. It becomes boring. It's really the focus of our lives when we're not a practitioner, and so then you become free. And so that's my life task in the last years of my life, is to be free.
I wonder if you might say something about the deep training mechanism, presumably, of that process. Because to say, for example, as you did, well, you just don't take things as personally, can seem like, or can be read to be, I think, just sort of nice life advice and that sort of thing. But when a window crashes behind you and you don't take that personally, that's a different
right?
That's a different kind of taking personally. That's the level I think that your statement is addressing. Presumably, it's a training process that has affected some deep circuits in some way, or what's going on there?
Yeah, well, the training program for Dzogchen has come to really love and respect a Lama, and then you're doing Guru Yoga, and there's a procedure, in each Guru Yoga text and so forth, and you think nothing's happening, what is this, the lights coming from there to them to you and all that. But merging your mind with the mind of an awakened master is the 100% what happens. That's it. And then having identified, I know you've heard this a million times, but for your listeners, having identified what is this other channel going on, running concurrently with the delusional channel that I have been tuned to, what's the undiluted, undefiled state, and turn to that channel. And that's the training. And how to do that is, deity practice is the training wheels. because you're seeing your pure nature, in the development stage. And it does contribute to Dzogchen as a gradual way of moving toward. Of course, there's some paths where, particularly in Europe, people are we're going right to Dzogchen, some Dzogchen preliminary practices, but that's it. This is not the way we did it. It's okay. The training is just that. And then our training was, I don't think I'm telling tales out of school here. In the world around Dongse Tilling Rinpoche, the Longchenpa's Chögyingze, the basic treasury of basic space, or however you want to translate that, of which there's now 2 good translations out of and another forthcoming. You would read that. I mean, ostensibly, the root text, this is the thing about yogis. The scholars, they focus on the commentary to the root text. All, like the root text was for like memorization and of the key points. And there's a short little text, often in verse. And so the root text says it's what we know as a Chögyingze. And then there's a commentary, which is all the intellectual explanation and really important points if you need clarity. And so I was noticing this recently, that the scholars, they see this as, like the commentary is the more important thing. And the yogis generally see the root text, so, as the most important thing. Like similarly with Dudjom Lingpa's Sarha Nyingthig. The yogi Lama would teach from the root text, rather than all the intellectual knowledge, drawing comparisons with erudite texts from the past and, relating it to Mahayana and, all these things. So I'm not saying that commentaries are bad, but so this is used to refresh our view. Reading the root text, the Chögyingze is you'd read a line and then you practice. And then you would, when you're get dull, they would say, is the language they use, when you're not able to rise up out of the muck of your storehouse consciousness, and you're not raising up into your true basis. And then you bring the Chögyingze again, you read another line and then practice like that. Or you could do Guru Yoga over again, or sometimes there's some brief phrases or seed syllables, soundings, so forth. Since I'm not a Dzogchen teacher, I'm not going to go into any of that. But that's our lifestyles, uncontrived, less contrived, and even sitting down, anything could be done anywhere that you're comfortable in any position. But generally, if you want to go through the procedure, there's a sitting nicely, and doing the Guru Yoga. You might do it for a good long time. Receive the 4 empowerments from the imagined Lama figure in front of you. Merge your mind with the Lama's mind. And you're there. It refreshes whatever introduction you've had in the past to where there is. And it doesn't have to, you don't have to then think, oh, I need to, wait a minute, I'm not there yet, I need to go deeper. There's no thinking involved, trying to find, one of our previous lineage lamas said, it's not like the, tukpa, the noodle soup that the Tibetans all make. You want to dig down to get the good stuff at the bottom of the pot. So there's no digging, it's not like that. It's just it's just there you are. And that means it's kind of fits with old age in a way. A lot of people practice Dzogchen when they're young, not dissing them, but the natural, as Piaget and these developmental psychologists would say, the natural is an industrial time of our lives, and when the end is in sight, then you could, at some point, everybody that's going to have any kind of happiness has to decide in general that they've landed, in their life. This is the life that they got. and that helps with Dzogchen, because there's not the striving feeling of always having searching. You have to, at some point, and this I've been scolded about ever so gently, stop looking around for this, this practice and sniffing around, for something better. There isn't anything better. So that's the idea. And if you're gonna ask how that relates to Zen, I have no idea. No idea. But it is, ostensibly it's similar. It's just sitting, it could be said that, you could say that about any Zen or Chan tradition, probably. So, and whether there's, people say doctrinally what the difference is, but I don't know what really the difference is for practitioners.
Yes, I won't force you to compare all the different systems. The reason I brought up the Shambhata Vipassana context is because you had a background in that too. In that more.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Last episode, you, towards the end, began to describe the fruits of practice, fruits of your own practice. You talked about joy and peace, a sort of undercurrent of joy and peace.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned that you think it's important to talk about these things, to share to an extent, the results of one's practice or the fruits. You also talked about overcoming depression and anxiety through the practice. Or are these the sorts of things you talked about with your lamas? I've heard it said, for example, that in some trainings in this tradition, one reports to the lama, or you're questioned by the lama after a retreat or at a certain point in the retreat, to test and see if whatever practice you've done has ripened properly and if you can have the next bit and so on, this sort of dialogical process. Is that how you were trained? And if so, might you give us some insight into that sort of a process?
No, not really. My Lama from Tibet did a process of giving people exercises, sending you away to do them for a year and bringing you back. And but there was never any and therefore now you have attained the state of, whatever. It was just okay, here's the next practice, right? And that wasn't really Lama Tharchin's way. You just do the work. There was not a lot of the atmosphere. The feeling was through your retreat is not that big a deal. You're just going to go someplace and meditate for 3 years, intensively. There was some practice, and there was no. It wasn't I don't think he would have the time to do that anyway with all the people in the retreat and all of his own students, but nor would he might not want to. So I didn't get that. And I think the best thing you can get is a mild scolding. If you're off track, they will let you know. And that's great. And there's a little bit, through your retreat process, there's a bit of a regression where you end up acting like a child, during retreat, and really reparenting, honestly, in a new way. Developing your old hysteria comes out, and then you're shown one way or another, but that doesn't work. Yeah. So no, there's not there's no end point, There's no outcome where and typically I've heard from other people also, for example, if you had a big experience, like a bliss or non-thought, and the question is always, is it nyams? Is it just a meditation experience that's going to go like mist disperses, or is it topa, realization that's permanent? And the lamas will always say it's nyams. It's experiences, don't make a big deal out of it. Maybe, I mean, that from what I know, that's the standard. So at some point you have to decide, if what is realization, and also decide, you're good enough. Because, I've got Buddha nature, you've got Buddha nature, and whatever I'm doing is the way we're supposed to practice. And many people have gained realization and Buddhahood from doing it this way. And I feel inspired by my Vajra sisters and brothers. In a way, it's kind of unique here in California, and I didn't know it was, I won't say in the world, of course, but it's more similar to the atmosphere at the time was more similar to like being in a community in Bodha or something, Nepal or something like that. Where there were a lot of really good practitioners. And for example, my Vajra brother, Dennis, just passed away, and he was a student from the 70s, excellent Dzogchen teachers. And he decided just to focus on Trekchen, his Lama told him to, and not go seeking out a lot of other teachers. And so he just sat and practiced diligently. And that was what he loved to do most in the world for like 20 years or something from then on, from the point of his first Lama passing. And then my Lama from Tibet came, and he was in the same lineage, and he studied with him a bit. But he never got wrapped up in all the, I need to learn this ritual, I need to learn this physical exercise, I need to, all this, because he really got the view bug early on. And he just passed away, and he role modeled how to do it professionally. And the Lama did say he had great accomplishment after his passing. And it was obvious that he would, because there wasn't any other way it could be, because he'd learned to identify the luminosity, clear light. So naturally, he would be liberated in the bardo of Dharmata. And I don't have any doubt about that. And he was very calm and just practicing. We went and visited him, he had people around, caregivers and stuff at home. And I said, how's your practice? He said, oh, that's fine. He could barely move. He had pancreatic cancer, but no problem. That's all good. So, and I've had more than one experience like that with really excellent practitioners passing away. And I'm so happy that I get to be like them. Just how satisfying. And, and ultimately I'm really happy that I'll get to benefit sentient beings in the future lives. This life, I'm not an important person, and I don't need to be an important person ever. But I would like to hope that the promise of Dzogchen is correct, and that we will be able to recognize the Dharmakaya, if not in this life, maybe in the next one, and emanate form bodies to benefit all kinds of sentient beings, from regular people like us to bodhisattvas on the bhumis. Wow, cool. So it does give me joy. Yeah.
I mean, I could ask you more questions about all of that, but I mean, in a way, that's
it. Yeah.
Kind of it, isn't it?
That's kind of it. I think I would just like to just hope that people practice, something. And if they can practice great perfection or Vajrayāna inner tantras, I really recommend it. It's been really great for me. It's tough if there aren't a lot of lamas around where you're living. I know, like good ones, and especially tough if there's bad ones around that are, doing awful things. And so there's issues in certain parts of the US, certain parts of Europe, where there really aren't that many good lamas. I know from people telling me, not from personal experience. So there's this kind of uncontaminated pure view that you can have when you hook up with a lama is impinged upon. And there's always this thing, is he going to turn out to be like this one over here? And can I trust this person? And it contaminates the whole field. But you don't need, like if somebody once said, when we got out through your retreat, one of my Vajra sisters, was saying, the economy was tanked, 2012. I don't need to find every job. I just need to find one job. Get out of here. And that, you don't need to find every Lama. The whole system, you don't have to relate to this as like the Catholic Church. It's really between you and one teacher or a small group of teachers where they all support each other, teachings all support each other. And then you can find this wholly positive mind that because what's in front of you and the Lama is wholly positive, and you are, Kuntazanpo, ever present, ever fresh wakefulness. And that's so rare, in this many, many lifetimes that we could have the time to do it. I mean, I'm just going to reiterate the precious human birth, If you have something like that and you have the spiritual inclination, I would jump on it. Because there's nothing, it's hard to imagine. I mean, I knew when I was working in a nursing home, I remember an older woman who passed away and she died believing she was going to heaven to be with Jesus. And she was smiling when she passed away. So that's good. But so if we're not going to be Christians, go to Jesus, and we don't have faith in that path, then we have to make a little bit of an effort to find someone and practice. And so please do, everybody.
Yudron Wangmo, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.